Hi, I'm Joe Mimran, and welcome back to the Export Impact Podcast. If you run a business, you know that your website is more than a collection of pixels and code. It's the face of your business and an expression of your vision, purpose, and identity as an entrepreneur. In many cases, it's your most active interface with your customer. But how do you make a website that captures the essence of your business and presents it at a world-class level? That's where the professionals come in. One of them is Dave Hale, the CEO of Craft&Crew, a Canadian design firm who call themselves, quote, the best website producers on earth. And while you might think that's a lofty claim, they have the portfolio to back it up. Dave's here to tell us all about the principles of good design, how he expanded his business internationally, and what success means to him. I'd like to begin today's episode by acknowledging that we're recording from my office in Toronto, which is on the traditional unceded territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We value taking this moment to deepen the appreciation of our Indigenous communities wherever we are and to remind ourselves of our shared debt to Canada's First Peoples. Welcome, Dave.
Well, thank you, sir. What an honor to be interviewed by you today.
Yeah, well, the honor is mine as well. Reading about your business and your background, it's quite impressive. And certainly that you look like you're on the acquisition trail at the same time. So you've built an amazing business. And before we get started, is it Dave or is it David?
I mean, technically, my mother would say David, as would my wife. I go by Dave. The story is, if you're interested in hearing, in the 7th grade, I read something that said that the most memorable names have the fewest syllables and end in vowels. And my 12-year-old brain was like, oh my God, you are one move away from having the most memorable name per whatever random factoid at the time. And Dave Hale was born as like a new ego, basically. So I came home that day, told my parents I'll henceforth be Dave Hale, the most memorable name you can have. And my mother had none of that. So it was always David.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. And it's obviously kept you in good stead. So why don't we start by just giving us a little bit of background on Craft&Crew and what you do and how you've expanded the business?
Sure thing. So I think it's almost important to understand, like, there's Craft&Crew 2.0, there's 1.0 that preceded that. We were actually called Social at the time. And then there's almost Craft&Crew 3.0, which I'd say is where we've been going down the last year and look to continue to do so. So in the 1.0, Social Group Inc. was founded as a social media management firm in 2010. And if you remember those times, like, there was actually no Facebook business pages. People were tweeting things still, not Xing things. And, there was a business to be built around just doing the community management or social media campaigns and that kind of stuff at the time. Funny enough, it was never my objective. I never wanted to just be that marketer. It was just kind of the corner of the room that CMOs and marketing VPs were willing to put me in. I've never had a problem getting into boardrooms, but we'd get into those boardrooms and then you'd be kind of put in the corner of like, well, there's this social media stuff we know nothing about. If you want to help us with that, sounds good. But in terms of our advertising or our marketing strategy, our branding work, I was like, no, we'll leave that to the professionals, kid. So as time went on, we did evolve out of that. And really, by 2020, late 2019, the vast majority of our business was really doing two things. We were doing large-scale website design and development for largely business-to-business, B2B brands, some of the most notable ones on earth, and SurveyMonkey, and we've done some work for Honda and do a lot of work for Realtor.ca and companies like that. And we also had this burgeoning kind of media division as part of our business as well, where we do media strategy, media planning, campaign management, and buying. And from there in 2020, we really realized like this kind of social name and positioning wasn't serving us very well anymore, and rebranded the company to Craft&Crew, which was really a nod to, we do two things we think that make us successful. You have to be really good at what you do, the craft, and you need to have the best people who do it, the crew. So that's where the name came from in that 2020 rebrand. And what's been funny is that since then, as you said, yeah, we've kind of further evolved the business where today, what I would say Craft&Crew Corp is really trying to do is become one of the largest marketing agency networks on earth, and kind of further continuing to reinvent ourselves and evolve the business model away from not only just providing really great services by really great people, but also having a nod to international growth, expansion, mergers and acquisitions, and everything that kind of goes along with that to grow our business in hopefully a pretty dramatic way moving forward.
I mean, that's quite a bit that you're doing now and quite a bit that you've evolved into. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about ad agencies in bygone days and sort of where you think ad agencies fit into all of this today. Because it sounds like, marketing is such a big word, right? You seem to be sort of touching into so many different areas now. And I'm really curious to understand, because I think marketing has become so complex and it's become so fragmented that it's very difficult to get attention these days. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I think that'd be most interesting.
I so agree with the premise that you just gave in terms of marketing being so complex, dynamic, multifaceted, et cetera, that we've actually largely built our business model around the avoidance of that complexity. One thing I didn't say in that overview is that while we refer to ourselves as a marketing agency, we are firmly kind of entrenched as a marketing production company. So if you look at the things that we do, the companies that we own, we have a video production company called Simple Story Videos. We have a website production company, which is our kind of flagship name, Craft&Crew. Our media agency, quote unquote, media propulsion laboratory, really what we are doing is a lot of media planning, but buying being the big business there, which is like the production end of media strategy. And then we have another web agency called Phoenix that does a lot of website maintenance and support, which again is even the next level of production layer down from website design and development. And so a lot of our clients are actually marketing or advertising agencies themselves who are focused on managing the big, complex, multifaceted world of marketing. And ironically, we're over here saying, hey, we have a few lanes that we stay in as a production level partner to you. That's what we're really good at doing. That's what we want to do. So we've actually moved away from inserting ourselves in a lot of those client conversations with a CMO or a VP of marketing or the CEO of the company in terms of where's the brand going? What are the channels we're using? What are the promotion strategies? Funny enough, I'm like, yeah, that is too complex now for my simple brain. So we will just sit back and do the things that we do. We've carved out our areas that we are really good at. And we're like, that's what we want to be known for. So the idea of the network we're building is actually meant to be the network partner that takes little slivers of that complexity and knows how to do that sliver really well across a few different fields.
That's interesting. Having said that, I mean, you do make some claims like we can get you 20x ROAS, right? Which to me sounds pretty marketing laden. Now, having said that, I also noticed that you are servicing more B2B than B2C. And so maybe that changes the thinking on it.
So some of these claims like our 20 times return on ad spend, those are real numbers from real clients. And at the end of the day, I think what we've developed, and you spoke about a little bit of a focus of ours in the B2B space, we do actually have clients across the spectrum through some acquisitions of other agencies we've experienced in the last year. But our bread and butter really is in that B2B space. And so what's interesting about enterprise level organizations is that we do the opposite of what I would like to call like ring a bell, get a cookie advertising on our media propulsion lab part of our business. So ring a bell, get a cookie would be like someone has a Shopify store, they're selling sunglasses. Those sunglasses cost $58 and we just need to put an Instagram ad in front of that person being like, look at these cool sunglasses. We spent $1.28 and someone to click on that. They go over to the Shopify store, they buy the sunglasses, and there we go. We had that's ring a bell, get a cookie, or in that case, get some sunglasses. The clients we're working with have complex sales processes. They have multi-stages to their funnel in terms of how to work through an enterprise customer. You're not just going to show someone an ad on LinkedIn or an ad before they watch a YouTube video, and that's not going to get them to take action. Even showing them that same ad 7 times per old advertising standards is not going to get them to take action. We actually have to build a really informed funnel and tie into internal systems, sales processes, call centers, regional demographics and geographies in terms of offers that are being made in one part of the country or the world versus others. It gets really complex. But through that complexity, if you're committed to working with your client to figuring out all elements of that complex process, then that's where you can start seeing the results and getting, a 20 times return on ad spend.
Tell me a little bit about this idea of ring a bell and get a cookie, because I feel like you've put that into the simplistic basket, which I think I have just fallen into, by the way, Dave. So you put me into that basket because, I like ringing a bell and getting a cookie. Is there any magic to that you can provide to clients, or is your world just a little more complex?
I think that when you're in the ring a bell, get a cookie category, you just need to understand margins really well and understand what it costs to acquire a customer really well. And then how do you get that customer to be a repeat customer? That kind of falls outside the scope of what we concern ourselves with.
Yeah, I think that falls more into this whole notion of who you are as a business, as a brand, as a company, and the relationship you have with your customer and how you get them motivated to give you a cookie in different ways, right? You can't just ring a bell. So going back for a minute, you said large enterprise level organizations is where your focus is. I get that. Given that you've been acquiring all these businesses, how much time do you actually get to spend with clients versus sort of management? Are you now spending most of your time managing the relationships of your own business and not doing as many board presentations?
The summer has been spent in deep reflection on not just the year that was, but where we're going. And yeah, funny if I spend 0 time right now with our team outside of my direct reports. And those direct reports are mainly, like you said, kind of the leaders of each of our business units, or maybe some of our senior salespeople, our finance VP. So I would say that those are the kind of parts of the business that the last year I've really been spending my focus on. That part of the business is the part I love the most, for sure. And definitely I can say with great certainty in the last year, I've probably spent less than 10% of my time doing that kind of stuff. But definitely, ironically, I just created this new revenue team within the business that's kind of like the sales leaders from all the areas of the business now coming together for one kind of group meeting. And this is one of the things I was saying, like, get me in front of our big customers. We're a classic business. We have a handful of customers that actually make up a pretty significant amount of revenue. I'm like, get me in front of them. I want to do the lunches and get me on the plane, get me out to go see them, because that is what fulfills me and brings me joy. And it's not happening right now. So I appreciate you asking the question, actually.
Now, this podcast is really geared to helping entrepreneurs from an export perspective. And we tend to speak more to people who provide actual products and all of the hurdles around breaking into new markets with products. And yours, it's very service oriented, obviously. And when I think about exporting, what are some of the hurdles that you came across when you were trying to export your business into the United States in particular? I don't know if you've expanded beyond the US. Obviously, you have clients that are international at this point. So I guess by virtue of those relationships, you're in essence international. But I would think the US is a big focus, but also your services, with all due respect, can't be so unique that they can't find people in the US to provide them. So what gives you that competitive advantage that allowed you to break in? I'd love to know how you did it and how you broke through, because it's not easy.
Yeah, well, I think I can probably chalk it up to 3 things. So number one, credit where it's due. A former business partner of mine and good friend He was kind of like our chief operating officer, pseudo chief financial officer. And years ago, he would obsess about programs offered by EDC, where it's like, if you're ever going to be able to tap into any of those programs, we need to have at least 20% of our revenue coming out of the US, at least that's what it was at the time. And so there was always this every year in annual planning sessions. There was literally always like a 20% US business that would get put forward in terms of like intentional growth strategy to unlock programs and interests and be able to get to come on podcasts like this and so on. So that would be number one. Number two, I honestly think that without the pandemic, we never would have forced ourselves into what is actually a very comfortable lane for us. And we just never really realized it before the pandemic. So what I mean by that is I'm actually based here in Ottawa. We're not Toronto based. We're not in Vancouver or New York or Chicago or LA or London, like major marketing advertising markets. I'm here in Ottawa, home of the federal government and every national nonprofit and association in Canada. These are not the organizations you think of when you think of like leading marketing organizations. I think that because we're based in Ottawa and because of who I am and I think who we are as an entity, as an organization from a culture standpoint, we've always wanted to work with the big brands and the best marketers and whatever. Well, they're not here in our backyard. No offense to Ottawa. There's fantastic talent here. We have some really great tech companies as well. But in terms of those really all-star marketing culture, we don't have that here in Ottawa. So we always had to go elsewhere. And I used to, before I had kids and before I was married, like I would have a schedule that would be like Mondays, Ottawa, Tuesday, Toronto, Wednesday, Chicago, Thursday, Toronto, Friday, Ottawa. And I'd do that again. We had offices in both Toronto and Chicago at that time. And I think because we were always so focused on there's not enough business in our own backyard, we always had to look elsewhere. But it was always still very Canadian centric, even though we had that Chicago outpost. It was always like, we got to go to Toronto. That's where the business is, or Montreal. And then the pandemic hit and all of a sudden everyone is comfortable doing Zoom meetings for pitches, for new business pitches. And for me, the eye-opening experience was if I was going to Toronto for the day, I would try to get 2 or 3 meetings lined up to maximize my time being there for the day. And I'd only go once every couple of weeks. So really you're looking at like, in terms of not in your own backyard business development, I was really meeting with like 1 new prospect a week, let's say on average. Pandemic hit, I was having 5, 6, 7 new business prospect meetings a day, back to back to back to back on Zoom, where, we are efficient and the people on the other end were perfectly fine with that working relationship. And it just made all the difference. And I think it also then showed like, well, in this borderless world we're now living in digitally, it just became so obvious that it's like, well, now I don't need to worry about getting on a plane. Now I don't need to worry about not spending time with my kids. I can have 5, 6, 7 meetings a day if I want to. And then I think then that enters point number 3, which is like, well, if that's the new superpower we have access to, where are you going to point that time and energy and attention? And it just so happens that I don't know if you know this, Joe, I'm sure you do, that you get 30 cents on the dollar more when that business comes over the border. So it becomes very easy to be like, well, if I could call anybody, where am I going to call? Well, how about we call to the place that if they accept our quote, immediately we're making 30% plus more the second it hits our bank account. And then I think that America, especially the US, is just such an amazing market if you know how to market to it. Americans, it is actually all the stereotypes are true. Like we don't get asked where we're from. We get on the call. They might think we're from the Midwest. I hear that a lot. They're like, oh, your accent sounds like you're not Canadian. You might be from the Midwest. But they just don't ask the question. Like, we heard you're the best at what you do. Therefore, we don't care where you're from. Let's go. Let's do the thing. And I think that's very different. Even now, if I get on a new business meeting with a Canadian organization, I guarantee you within the first 5 minutes, they're going to say, where are you guys based? If I get on that same call with an American organization, when it comes up most often is when they're in procurement, where they're signing our contract and realizing that this company's headquartered in Canada and questioning where we're going to resolve our dispute. Should there be one? Is it going to be in Delaware or is it going to be in Ottawa, Canada? That's really where it comes up.
And is that the extent of the red tape that you think is there when you're dealing with a US customer? Is that it? I mean, is that the only hurdle?
I think that today, that is one of the only hurdles. I'm paying very close attention to what's going to happen in the next election, because depending on who you get, the energy might turn away from working with international partners and going back towards more of a America first type of policy. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, and I can't make this up. Like I spend almost no time thinking about this. It just makes more sense. Their budgets are bigger. The people are easier to work with. They are more entrepreneurial. And this is nothing against Canada. I'm saying this in hopes that other Canadian entrepreneurs are like, let's go and do business in the US, or, I spent some time in the UK this summer prospecting there as well. Same thing. It's almost like you get a bit of a benefit of being a person from Canada trying to do business there. And that would be the last thing I'll say on this, Joe, is that I think we are getting the best of both worlds in that our American clients, when they do find out we're Canadian, they think we're all the stereotypes, that we're so nice and easygoing and jovial and all this kind of stuff. Behind the scenes, we're just like them. like I'm out to win the pitch, win the business. But I think that we maybe go about it in a way from a cultural standpoint that, those American clients also feel is very refreshing to them as well. And I think that's had a big benefit for us.
I mean, I don't know. I think that you're not giving yourself enough credit. I don't think it has anything to do with being Canadian. I think it has to do with you having the courage and the guts to just go out there and get the business. You're aggressive. And I think that is the true sign of an entrepreneur. You're not afraid to just go out and get the business. And that's part of, I think, the ability to be successful outside of Canada. And you're not thinking small, you're thinking big, which is another aspect that maybe Americans do think big generally. And maybe they relate to you more for that reason than the fact that you're Canadian. And I love being Canadian too. Don't get me wrong. This country's been amazing and love it and proud of it. But I think that thinking more aggressively and thinking bigger is a big part of it. So that's really what it is. And this idea of a borderless world is so true. And it's really impacted how commerce is really done today. And you have a homegrown company in Ottawa that's really benefited from that, which is Shopify. And they've done a pretty fantastic job of helping young entrepreneurs around the world. So tell me, what is the vision now for the future of Craft&Crew? You've just explained that you wish you got a little closer to your clients, but I have a feeling that's not going to stop you from continuing to grow. Why don't you lay out your future vision for your company?
It comes down to a few things, which is in 2012 or 2013, the Ottawa Business Journal gave us the award of being the second fastest growing company in Ottawa, behind only Shopify, ironically, at the time. And we were the only company on the list of 10 that also had no outside funding. And I remember when we won that 2013, and by 2015, we had nearly gone bankrupt. And what I said at the time was, no services company should ever be the fastest growing anything, because you're funding your growth with cash flows that you don't have. And I think when I reflect back on the last year, here we are, we had massive growth here. And I kind of feel the same. I'm like, should we have grown that quickly? There's impacts to culture, impacts to performance. And so I have a lot of energy to doing it again this year. I have a lot of energy to be like, let's double, let's triple, let's quadruple, let's go for it. And I think that's going to be an important part of our evolution. If you were to ask, what do I want 10 years from now? We can grow something really special, globally focused, and being the best at what we do. And I think that it's important, though, for entrepreneurs to recognize there's a lot to sort out, a lot of processes. We're trying to integrate multiple companies to follow similar processes. And these are things that, you don't get taught in your 2-year college marketing diploma program.
Yeah, you're learning it on the fly, but I'm sure you've got access to great talent that can help you synchronize these various pieces and people who've done it before to help you along the path. But it sounds like you're being very thoughtful and very human about it, which is another great sign of a great entrepreneur, which is what I think is who I'm interviewing with right now. So finally, as we come to the end of our conversation, there's so many entrepreneurs out there listening and getting inspired by your story. Can you share some advice to them? I know you've already talked a lot about how you've grown the business, but is there anything specific that you would provide to them in terms of moving into the US or exporting beyond Canada?
I guess the couple things I would say is number one, know your worth. I think that it would be very easy to do as a Canadian company going into the US is say, well, we can just compete on price. We were talking earlier about that 30% plus bump when those dollars come across the border. But the way I look at it is that's nice to have. We're in a certain economic climate where that's just a fun reality we have today. I haven't looked at what the exchange rate is today, but that can change. That can fluctuate. You can't build a business on fluctuation and exchange rates. We're not a bank. So I think for us, it's very important to be entering into the US or other international markets with our pricing being what it is and being like, yep, we're good enough and deserving enough of the prices we charge. And I think that there's an allure from other Canadian entrepreneurs who I speak with, especially in my kind of field services businesses and so on and so forth, where it's like, well, I can undercut my competition and that's how I'm going to win. And I think that like undercutting on price is a really like short-term way of thinking about growing your business over time. Because I've said to some friends of mine who run other agencies where they're charging like $120 an hour, let's say. Well, we charged $120 an hour 10 years ago. And I think that if you're charging $120 an hour, the mechanics of the business model mean you can only pay somebody a certain amount of money. In our business, what you probably have as cost of goods sold that for that person is about a third of that 120. So you're talking about $40 an hour, fully loaded costs, taxes, CPP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you start building out $40 an hour and you can only pay that person so much per year, which means you're only able to access a certain caliber of talent, which means they can only produce a certain quality of work. And in our business, that is then what you're going to get pigeonholed into. So we like to think of it as like, we're going into the US, we're charging American rates. We put ourselves up there. It allows us to hire even better people in Canada. And that's how we compete. We're competing on quality of talent and ideas and insights and innovation, not let's have a race to the bottom on price. Because if you can be actually bringing better talent than your American counterparts can, you're going to keep winning the business. You're going to get the referrals. But I think that's the thing Canadians do. We sell ourselves short, or we think like, oh, let's go take advantage of the pricing in the US instead of looking at it as like a cherry on top. So I think that's probably the number one thing I would tell other Canadian entrepreneurs.
That's a good secret sauce. That's for sure, because you are actually using the exchange difference as leverage in terms of being able to pay and get better talent. And great talent is at the heart of it, but also having an inspirational leader like yourself, I think is a big part of attracting the right talent, because they obviously look to you to get their inspiration and to say, I want to be part of this amazing organization that's done all these wonderful things and is really sitting in an exalted position in the Ottawa market. So I think that's something that you should be really proud of, because you've done such a terrific job. Now that I've had the opportunity to meet you, I can understand why you've done so well. So Dave Hale, CEO of Craft&Crew, he certainly knows his worth, and now we get to know his worth. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today, Dave.
It has been a pleasure, and I thank you for taking the time to chat with little old me, Joe. So appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us today on the Export Impact Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on your favorite streaming platform. See you back here in 2 weeks.